From playboy weapons dealer to self-sacrificing father, Iron Man's story is the heart of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. No other MCU character has changed as much as Tony Stark. We all knew Stark's tech would evolve from film to film, but what was even more fascinating was the growth that Tony made as a man, without any fancy suit. Speaking of fancy suits, hey Jarvis, give me a hand here. Let's look at the evolution of Iron Man starting at the very beginning.
All right, sir. Setting course for 2008.
In the spring of 2008, Marvel Studios launched its cinematic universe with the release of Iron Man. It was quite the risk, seeing as how Iron Man was no A-list hero from the comics, but the gamble obviously paid off. Audiences across the globe were reintroduced to an undeniable star in Robert Downey Jr. He played Tony Stark to perfection, which would catapult the actor's Hollywood comeback. Tony Stark was a charismatic, quick-witted genius billionaire who, let's be honest, was also an asshole. A lovable asshole, with an exhausting ego and laundry list of personal flaws. A playboy without parents. As CEO of Stark Industries, Tony was thrust into a position of great power, and cared only about selling his family's arsenal of weapons and courting women.
You ever lose an hour's sleep your whole life?
Be prepared to lose a few with you.
The people around him all seemed to be on his payroll, or at the very least, hanging around for good business. This included Pepper Potts, Happy Hogan, James Rhodes, and business partner slash surrogate father Obadiah Stane. Tony's circle of friends, I use the term friends loosely here, was pathetically bereft of any deep human connection. Tony really only made time for Tony. But then one fateful day, he woke up in a cave in Afghanistan with a car battery attached to his chest. Terrorists had ambushed his Fun V using missiles that Stark Industries had built and sold. Tony survived the assault, but the billionaire futurist would never be the same again. He survived thanks to his cellmate Ho Yinsen, who used an electromagnet to keep shrapnel from piercing his heart. After narrowly escaping death, Tony got a first-hand look at the fallout of his family's business. He's referred to as the greatest mass murderer in the history of the United States. Tony soon realizes the horrors of war, and how the weapons bearing his own name have terrorized the innocent. This devastating realization humbles him to a degree as the Ten Rings force him to build a weapon of their own. Instead, he starts work on a mini arc reactor that would not only keep him alive, but also power a suit of armor. That first suit, the Mark I, allowed him to safely escape from his captors. Sure, it was clunky and crude, but also a highly sophisticated bit of tech that would serve as the template for future suits. It was basically a bulletproof walking tank, with missiles and a flamethrower. Oh, and it could kinda fly. Back home, after he got his burger fix, he reversed course at Stark Industries and shockingly ceased all weapons manufacturing. This didn't sit well with some people. Tony continued to update his iron invention, creating the slick and silver Mark II made of titanium. Visually, the suit was a vast improvement, and Tony was also able to uplink his personal AI butler Jarvis to the suit.
I have indeed been uploaded, sir. We're online and ready.
The suit also featured this nifty heads-up display, some repulsors, and enhanced flight capabilities. Enhanced, but not perfect. It would freeze at high altitudes, which prompted Tony to mix in some gold alloy. The Mark III was born, showcasing those iconic Iron Man colors, miniguns, missiles, and flares. Tony proclaimed he was no longer in the weapons for profit biz, and instead used his own resources to dish out some revenge on the terrorists. It's important to understand Tony's motivation here. He didn't wage war against all bad guys across the globe. He sought revenge for what happened to him and his cellmate, and targeted the terrorists that were using his weapons. His motivations were still rooted in a bit of self-centeredness. Eventually, Tony would be challenged by the Stark Industries establishment in the form of Obadiah Stane in his Ironmonger suit. Turned out, Stane was behind the kidnapping from the very beginning, and had been secretly funneling Stark's weapons to terrorist organizations to turn a profit. After defeating Stane, Tony distanced himself from the past sins of Stark Industries. By the end of the film, Tony shocked the world, revealing that he was the man inside the armor suit.
I am Iron Man.
Tony wanted to wear the title of hero, but at this point, he was far from it. He was still the arrogant, womanizing genius we met in the very beginning. He just no longer sold some weapons and did some good. He was still flawed, but he made progress. And even more importantly, he was relatable, someone we would root for into the next decade. Enter Nick Fury. the director of the Avengers initiative shook up Tony's world, introducing him to some actual heroes. We'll get to the Avengers soon, but first... Of course, this whole superhero thing went to Tony's head. No surprise there.
Never has a greater Phoenix metaphor been personified in human history.
In Iron Man 2, Tony found himself facing his own mortality yet again. The technology that had kept him alive was also killing him. Not to mention, he was also putting up a fight for control of his own Iron Man suits, something that the US government wanted its hands on. At this point, Tony didn't want to submit to anyone else's wishes, not even the government. He was no team player and put his own judgment first. It would take some time, some bumps and bruises along the way, for Tony to learn that he can't do it all alone. Speaking of alone, he was slowly dying alone and didn't know how to cope with it. He was a bit reckless. Okay, really reckless. Also immature and downright dangerous. Super dangerous.
Drop it, Tony! Take it!
We saw that he had genuine feelings for his assistant Pepper Potts, but for a man that had the deepest and the most expensive toolbox in the world, he didn't have the tools nor the emotional maturity for this situation. Even Rhodey ultimately chose the US government over Tony because he knew right from wrong. He also knew that Tony was a liability. The Mark IV looked as slick as ever here, a fitting upgrade for the showman. It was bolder and brighter than ever, and even had some sort of waste management system built into it.
Just like that.
That's right, apparently Tony could pee in it. But when Tony comes face to face with a threat, he always comes through. When imposters pop up with copycat technology, he finds a way to deal with them. Whiplash was yet another ghost from the Stark Industries past that haunted Tony, believing that his family was unfairly treated. As for Tony's suit, his newest upgrade, the Mark V, made a cameo here. Its main selling point, it traveled as a briefcase and offered a quick suit-up in a time of need. Unfortunately, it wasn't all that durable. Tony would eventually solve the poisonous palladium problem by discovering a new element, and upgraded his armor even further. The triangular reactor harnessed more power, was resistant to electrical charge, and had a pretty nifty laser. But even with all those bells and whistles, he learned a valuable lesson. Iron Man can't do it alone. It's only when Rhodey assumed his new role as War Machine that the pair was able to defeat an insurmountable challenge. Clearly, yet another close call with death changed Tony. He finally considered the needs of others around him and made room for them to stand alongside him. It seemed Tony's arrogance was slowly eroding.
I got a new ticker. I'm trying to do right by Pepper. I'm in a stable-ish relationship.
Which leads us to believe at this juncture we'd only like to use you as a consultant.
It wouldn't take long for Tony Stark to face even higher stakes. Literally, stakes so great they came from the cosmos. This challenge marked one of the biggest turning points of Tony's life. Earth was being threatened by a god working alongside a mad titan. Loki's arrival prompted Tony to finally give in to the idea of working with a team. The threat was far too vast to handle on his own.
Make a move, Reindeer Games.
The Avengers, Earth's mightiest heroes, assembled, but it wasn't smooth sailing. Tony immediately butted heads with some and even exchanged punches with others. Tony Stark was forced to change yet again. The strength of his armor wouldn't save the day. Instead, it would be his mental malleability to put his ego aside for the greater good. That's not to say his new suit wasn't top-notch. The Mark VII was iconic in how it assembled around Tony, even in a freefall. The circular arc reactor returned and the suit seemed to be much more durable in heavy battle. So what spurred Stark's continued change? Well, the realization that he could no longer face the challenge alone. But also, one of the greatest influences on Tony Stark the hero and Tony Stark the man was Captain America. Actions speak louder than words, and while Tony told everyone he was a hero, Steve Rogers put in the work. They were the polar opposites, and Cap openly questioned whether Tony Stark had it in him to actually become a hero.
You know, you may not be a threat, but you better stop pretending to be a hero.
A hero? Like you? You're a laboratory experiment, Rogers. Everything special about you came out of a bottle.
Let's not forget that Tony also had a bunch of baggage about his dad being friends with Steve. That brings us to the Battle of New York. Following a rocky start to their relationship, Tony is actually content with being a supporting player, and lets Steve Rogers lead the team against Loki and the Chitauri army.
Call it, Captain.
All right, listen up. Until we can close that portal, our priority is containment.
And it was then, in the climax of this battle, that Tony Stark made a shocking decision that even had Steve Rogers surprised. With no other options available and a nuke headed straight for the Big Apple, Iron Man grabbed a hold of the missile and steered it straight for space. With seemingly no return, he made the selfless call under extreme circumstances and didn't hesitate. Tony Stark proved without a doubt he was a superhero. Of course, he would survive yet another close call with death, no surprise there, but the fallout from the heroic decision would have a lasting effect on Tony's psyche moving forward.
What just happened? Please tell me nobody kissed me.
We won.
That brings us to the third installment in the Iron Man trilogy. In Iron Man 3, Tony struggled with the mistakes he made throughout his journey, his anxieties following the Battle of New York, and the realization that he can't save everyone. Sure, he proved to be a hero that fateful day in New York, but he was left with some serious emotional scars from his journey into the wormhole. We finally see Tony struggle with the psychological effects of war and the PTSD that comes with saving the universe.
My diagnosis is that you've experienced a severe anxiety attack.
So how did Tony deal with the trauma? Well, he spent as much time as he could doing Tony things, which means in his workshop tinkering with his inventions. Even for someone as work-obsessed as Tony, this was unhealthy. He neglected the woman he loves, but hey, at least he created an entire Iron Legion fleet of suits. Sure, the tech was impressive. The Jarvis-controlled army of suits were formidable, and the Mark 42 assembled piece by piece around him thanks to computer chips in his skin. Ouch. Tony was able to remotely control his suit, which was awesome, but also had its drawbacks. Unfortunately, he also laid the groundwork for the eventual technological leap that would bring about Ultron. Again, Tony's past comes back to haunt him in the form of Aldrich Killian, a Stark wannabe who was into some serious performance-enhancing drugs. At one point, after Happy Hogan was nearly killed, Tony reverted back to his cocky and reckless old ways. He publicly taunted the Mandarin, which brought the fight to his doorstep. His arrogance nearly killed the woman he loved. Ultimately, Tony was forced to find out who he was without the gadgets and gizmos. While stranded far from home, he befriended a boy that reminded Tony of himself. Tony took a small step forward as a mentor and role model, something that would evolve further with Peter Parker. Without an assist from Jarvis nor any armor, Tony had to prove that he could do it himself, without the suit. There's no question that Cap's words were ringing in his head ever since their conversation in the Avengers.
Big man in a suit of armor. Take that off, what are you?
Genius, billionaire, playboy, philanthropist.
I know guys with none of that worth 10 of you.
It wasn't easy. Two of the people closest to Tony nearly died in this story, but by the end of the film, Tony prevailed. This time, though, he didn't save the day. That honor went to Miss Potts. Tony Stark learned a valuable lesson here about what he is and isn't capable of, and the limits of his own skill set. He also learns that he can't control everything. No one can. By the end of the film, he destroyed every single one of the suits he built, had the metal shards inside him surgically removed, and rid himself of the tech that had kept him alive for years. It was a clear metaphor of the man emerging from the suit. Tony had finally overcame the insecurities of who he was without that armor. Yes, he was a hero. The next time we'd see the Avengers assemble, Tony was all in with the team. He also had some fancy new tech. The Mark 43 was able to see through walls and assisted Tony in sentry mode when he wanted some fresh air. Tony also prepared for the inevitable Hulk rampage, and the Hulkbuster armor enabled for a more fair-matched fight.
Go to sleep, go to sleep, go to sleep.
We found out that the futurist had used his own resources and tech to ensure that the team was prepared for the next threat, no matter how big it was. But unfortunately, Tony had a hand in creating that threat. When Scarlet Witch got inside Tony's head, she produced a vision where everyone, all the Avengers and mankind, had been killed. This look into the future, coupled with his experience during the Battle of New York and the fall of S.H.I.E.L.D., fueled Tony to get proactive. Ultron was supposed to be an artificial intelligence that could help defend the world better than even the Avengers could, but it was easily one of Tony's worst mistakes. To make matters worse, Tony made the decision unilaterally without considering the consequences. Even Bruce Banner was a bit cautious.
I don't want to hear the man was not meant to meddle medley. I see a suit of armor around the world.
Sounds like a cold world, Tony.
I've seen colder.
Despite all that had changed, Tony still put his own judgment above others. He was dismissive to a room full of highly capable superheroes.
I'm on mission.
What mission?
Peace in our time.
Did I mention that Ultron was also responsible for Jarvis's death? Stark would replace Jarvis with a new operating system named Friday. Goodbye English accent, hello Irish one.
Good evening, boss.
After that failure, with a super murdering machine on the loose, Tony yet again created another world defender using some of the same tech. This again was deeply concerning to the entire team, but luckily Vision was nothing like his predecessor.
I am on the side of life. Ultron isn't. He will end it all.
Ultimately, the creation of Ultron led to the destruction of Sokovia and nearly the entire planet. The Avengers won but suffered great losses. Many innocent people were killed, and Tony's dream of a suit of armor around the world failed miserably. In Captain America Civil War, Tony was haunted by his costly mistakes and forced to grow up even further. After being confronted by a grieving mother whose son was killed in Sokovia, Tony finally realized the weight of those mistakes. Riddled with guilt, he now supported government regulations on the Avengers. He made a complete 180. This was the same man that gave the US military the middle finger years prior. He now believed that the Avengers shouldn't be above the law.
We need to be put in check. Whatever form that takes, I'm game.
Tony finally recognized that regardless of intent, actions have consequences. The Sokovia Accords would split the Avengers in half. The team's bonds eroded away, with Tony and Cap diametrically opposed to one another. Cap didn't trust the regulations. He had seen governments make the wrong choice before. So the remaining Avengers were forced to choose sides.
What do we do, Cap?
We fight.
Ultimately, Iron Man chose law and order over everything, and would imprison his former friends. The rift turned even uglier when Tony discovered that the Winter Soldier had murdered his parents. Cap argued that a brainwashed Bucky had no choice in the matter, but it was much more black and white for Tony.
This isn't gonna change what happened.
I don't care. He killed my mom.
The resulting fight was a hard watch, not just because of the violence, but also because it was personal. They each believed they were right and were willing to die for it. Tony blasted off the Winter Soldier's titanium arm, and his Mark 46 was able to analyze Cap's fighting patterns. But in the end, Cap prevailed. The two would forever be changed yet again.
That shield doesn't belong to you. You don't deserve it. My father made that shield.
A much more mature version of Tony Stark found a new role moving forward, as a father, the roots of which had started in Civil War. Tony became a father figure to Peter Parker and recruited him as an Avenger in training.
On the ruse!
In SpiderMan Homecoming, Tony kept tabs on the teenager. Well, he has Happy do the majority of the legwork, but dropped in when necessary. Other times, he just used some Wi-Fi. Tony tried his best to instill some patience and humility in Parker to ensure that the kid didn't make the same mistakes that had haunted Tony.
I'm nothing without this suit.
If you're nothing without this suit, then you shouldn't have it, okay?
Sounds pretty similar to what Tony learned about himself back in Iron Man 3. It's all about your character, not a tricked-out armor suit. By the end of the film, Parker defeated the Vulture and saved the day. Tony was impressed and offered Spider-Man a spot on the team, but Parker wasn't ready for the big leagues and turned him down.
I'd rather just stay on the ground for a little while. Friendly neighborhood Spider-Man. Somebody's gotta look out for the little guy, right?
You turning me down? You better think about this. Look at that. Look at me. Last chance, yes or no?
No.
Okay.
It was still a win for Tony, though. He was able to pay it forward to mentor a young mind again, and someone who could continue his legacy for years. If Tony ever had plans to retire in the near future, this seemed like a much better option than any fleet of robots Tony could create in his garage. The theme of family continued in Infinity War. Here we find a Tony that was focused on rebuilding the relationships around him as opposed to the gadgets in his workshop. His relationship with Peter Parker grew stronger as they grew closer. Tony treated Parker like a son, which perhaps sparked a paternal awakening inside him. At the start of the film, Tony shared his dreams of starting a family with Pepper, a far cry from the Tony Stark we met way back in Iron Man 1. Of course, Tony still tinkered with his toys. The Mark 50 took Iron Man into a whole new territory. This suit, based on nanotechnology, was yet another step towards perfection. It was Iron Man mixed in with the little T-1000. The suit could reshape itself around Tony in seconds, constructing countless missiles, cannons, blades, shields, and so on. Luckily, it was also capable of deep space flight. It was here, light years away from home, that Tony came across the biggest threat he'd ever face: Thanos, the Mad Titan himself.
You throw another moon at me, and I'm gonna lose it.
Stark. You know me?
I do. You're not the only one cursed with knowledge.
My only curse is you.
Not only did Thanos threaten Tony's future, the entire human race would be in jeopardy. Well, at least half the population. Tony's worst fears reawakened: the visions of being a sole survivor around his fallen friends, and the realization that he was helpless. This fight was unlike anything he had ever faced. In the end, Thanos prevailed. The Avengers spread thin, had lost. Half of humanity had turned to dust. And Tony watched on as the closest thing he had to his son vanished into thin air. Tony had failed, and he was in deep space with no means of getting home. He didn't even know what home looked like, if Pepper Potts was even alive. He thought this was the end until Captain Marvel showed up and gave him a lift. 5 years later, Tony found himself in unfamiliar territory. He finally had a family, something that he hadn't had since his parents died. That also meant that he had a new purpose and new priorities. Saving the world was no longer at the top of his list. Raising his daughter Morgan with Pepper reframed his perspective. His family was more important than anything else, something that he couldn't risk losing.
I'm honestly happy to see you guys. Oh, look, the table's set for 6.
Tony, I get it. And I'm happy for you, I really am. But this is a second chance.
I got my second chance right here, Cap.
But against all odds, well, 1 in 14,605,000, there was a chance that Tony could defeat Thanos. Armed with that knowledge and the first-hand account of all that he lost, Tony thrust himself back into the fight with the Avengers. While hesitant at first, Pepper motivated Tony to do what he does best. She knew that, ultimately, he would never find peace with what had happened. So for the final time, Tony polished off his Mark 80 suit, a pinnacle achievement in technology for the battle against his greatest enemy. The suit perfected everything from the previous versions, while paying homage to Steve Ditko's classic look. The Mark 80 would be more powerful than anything he wore previously, and strong enough for yet another one-on-one fight with the Mad Titan. And when it came to the final battle for Earth atop the remains of the new Avengers facility, Tony risked all of it. Again, he confronted his own mortality and was willing to sacrifice himself to save the planet.
And I am Iron Man.
It was a truly heartbreaking and powerful moment. Tony Stark had come full circle and proved yet again that he could make the sacrifice play. He knew the consequences. His daughter would lose her father, a wife would lose her husband, but there was no other choice. As Pepper put it, he could finally rest. The first decade of the MCU will forever be linked to the story of Iron Man. The cinematic universe grew up and matured alongside Tony Stark, a man that underwent radical change in front of our eyes. Like each of us, Tony learned through his experiences, the wins and the losses. Possibly even more importantly, the people around him spurred change. Amongst many others, Ho Yinsen, Pepper Potts, Steve Rogers, and Peter Parker each played a vital role in pushing Tony forward in his journey. Tony may not have been born a hero, but by the end of his story, he proved to be the one that Earth needed most. Sure, the costume makes the hero, but for Tony Stark, it was the man inside the armor that made him Iron Man. What's your favorite Iron Man moment from the MCU? And what other characters' journey should we explore here? Captain America? Thor? Let me know in the comments below. Thank you so much for watching, guys, and I'll see you soon. Now, how do I get out of this suit?